Feels like I just did one of these videos, but another response video. This time about To the Bloom. What kind of fencing should we or should we not be doing? Next. Jeff Tsai, Forte Swordplay. So today we're taking a look at a video that came out not too long ago, produced by James REILLY and Nathan from Arms and Armor, two gentlemen that I'm familiar with their work from afar, and the video that they put out was regarding a couple of different components, one of which is the equipment, the gear. Nathan CLOUGH has been, if you watch this video, and I highly recommend that you do, he's been going and taking good measurements of historical faders and being able to actually reproduce them and actually therefore being able to use them, as you can see in this video. So playing with new toys, especially historical toys, always very, very cool. The question though is, okay, once we have these historical tools, how should we be fencing with them? And you'll notice that they're using both slightly modified historical gear for headgear in particular, relatively light gloves, and then the kind of fencing that they're doing is, I would say, not what I would expect to see if you're thinking about modern competitive HEMA tournaments. And in fact, I'm going to characterize those as, and this is usually a default, but I'm going to call it out specifically, modern competitive HEMA tournaments that are single touch, meaning you land a single blow, and then there are varying rules afterwards, but like in general, you're going to be stopping relatively quickly. Stopping or be stopped, really. And that's one of the things I kind of want to draw attention to here. When you look at a few of the comments in this video, a handful of people are sort of quick to point out, hey, safety might be a concern. There's one comment that kind of says, hey, probably a pretty good idea to put some sort of disclaimer in front of this video about maybe don't do this at home or do it, with proper oversight. I think that's totally fair. The context for what I think should be done here when we're talking about these historical weapons is, frankly, not what is done in modern HEMA competitive tournament. Modern HEMA competitive tournament, from my experience, having seen this stuff evolve over the years, there's this sort of assumption, I think, that we're talking about trying to use these weapons in a fairly lethal setting. And we're basically making sure that we have protective gear to be there to make sure that these lethal things don't actually kill anybody. And I think there's some logical, there's some logic behind that. If you think about the difference between Schulfechten and Ernstfechten, like school tournament fencing versus lethal earnest fencing. I can understand why that kind of path has evolved in terms of the way we think about tournaments. However, again, when we're looking at history and we look at things like the Festschule back in the day, Holy Roman Empire, what turned into Germany, the rules and conventions that were followed at the time really are not super in alignment with what modern HEMA tournaments currently are, right? So examples. A very important one is the idea that, hey, we're going to actually land blows to a person's head that has no extra protective gear, and the idea is to land and leave some sort of, at the very least, a red, possibly bloody, possibly bleeding mark. Something that is known sort of to the bloom is a term that comes from history. So here's the thing. These Festschule events were known back in the day. This was a standard convention of actually understanding, if you've hit your opponent and scoring. And given that these were done fairly regularly, and that there was not like a huge amount of documentation suggesting that people were dying all the time. Presumably, this was done in a way that was controlled and reasonably safe and repeatable. So if you think about that expectation versus the kind of intensity that you see in modern HEMA competitive environments, there's kind of a big disconnect. And so I'm going to raise the question. I'm going to ask the question, what is being done in modern not Olympic for sure, sorry, modern HEMA competitive environments, is that what we should be doing, right? Is that the only thing that is valid? And so I'm not going to comment on that any further. I'm going to comment on what other things could we be doing, right? So if it was possible back in the day to actually fence in a way where you could actually land blows, not strike near a target and pull away, but actually land and make contact, and yet do it in a way where you're not crushing someone's skull and actually maiming and killing people. To me, and for the record, it does not take very much to actually crack somebody's skull with like a bar of steel that's flying at high speed at them, right? It does not take much. And so to me, one of the assumptions that I've had for a long time is like, that takes a tremendous amount of skill and control. So the thing that I want to kind of focus on today is the stuff that you're seeing in this video, I think is representative of another kind of approach that I think has a lot of value, even if you're going to go do modern HEMA single touch competitive environment, right? Just developing a ton more finesse and control of your technique and sword skill. There's a ton of value in that. But how do you actually achieve that? So I've got Andre here. This is something that we've been doing in our club increasingly over the past couple of years. There's different terminology for it. You can talk about it as festual type fencing. People also refer to it as blossfechten type fencing, literally sort of naked fencing or bare fencing. Really meaning fencing without really any sort of protection, or I think a good compromise would be light protection. So Andre, you've been doing this for a little bit. Do you have any sort of comments about your perspective on why we do it and what the benefits are?
Sure. Well, like with any martial art, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. It's not just martial arts either, but that's a term we get thrown around a lot. And we've seen it, I'd say, proven, or at least good, strong evidence in the last year at least, from some of our more dedicated blossers. I think of Blake in particular, someone from our club who's been on these videos before, took his first gold after about a year of doing a lot of bloss mixed into his training. And you can see how his fighting style changed. He was able to take, and he still can, of course, take advantage of his size, of his reach, of his presence in the ring, but techniques have really been coming out more and more, and subtler techniques. You'll notice the way he changes guard on the fly, the way he notices sooner when someone's intentions change before their posture really shifts in any significant way. Your ability to flow in combat with your opponent is greatly improved when you practice at a lower intensity, which I think is the main thing that comes out of low gear bloss sparring. And we've just started practicing with at least internally, we're using the term factual right now to mean a rule set that targets only the head, which is its own kind of sparring game. That's just how we're using it in shop right now, so we can distinguish between the two. Blossfechten being a broader category, factual being only targeting to the head. And both we found, obviously, you don't want to go into a tournament and just swing at the opponent's head, but you find in practice that if the head's your only target, you have to come up with some creative solutions to get there. It gets you thinking differently, it gets you moving differently. And you practice without gear, you're gonna have to get used to gear again, but it brings you something that you don't easily find. I think in theory, maybe you could just turn down the intensity too, if somebody's really afraid of doing it with low gear, which is fair. It's fair to have that, resistance, what's the word I'm looking for? Trepidation.
So I think based on what you're saying, there are a number of things that I think are important to highlight. So number one is the low gear aspect, right? Why? Why the low gear? One of the really big benefits of the low gear, to me, is high mobility, right? So even as someone who, kind of fences in full competitive HEMA gear, I mean, it can be done. It can be done, but one of the challenges is it definitely will limit your mobility. And you can tell this immediately by just, take the gear off and then try to do some of the things that you're working on, and it definitely impacts that mobility. So if you think about it from the other direction, if you're trying to do historical technique, and from my experience looking at historical technique, a lot of those things require a high level of manual dexterity. And so some of these things that we're trying to achieve are more complex, longer phrase techniques that are described. And in trying to work up to it, sure, you could try to, test it out in sort of like a modern, high-intensity kind of environment. But like with these more complex things, there's a lot of value to actually working up to it, where you can do things a little bit lower intensity, still have the full benefit of that ability to just get the feel of what this technique is supposed to be. So from a pure skills development, having the higher mobility is super valuable. The other thing about the low gear, there is a natural effect psychologically on people that, hey, if I'm fencing somebody with lower gear, I really don't want to hurt them, right? Like all of a sudden, one of the immediate sort of psychological impacts is an emphasis on being deliberate, being really deliberate about what it is you're trying to do, being a lot more precise. All of this just leads, again, to a lot more control and precision and finesse when it comes to developing these skills. All of that really, the more you do it, the more that gets ingrained into you. So when you combine the high mobility and the emphasis on control, your skill, we have found in this club that our skill just continues to climb, quite a bit when we spend a lot more time focusing on this. An important, I think, sort of optics caveat to this, right? So I think the other thing that I would say I want to highlight is something we do not condone. The idea of trying to fence low gear is not some sort of, for lack of a better term, macho activity, right? The idea is not to do this and be like, hey, I can outfence you and I can take a hit and all of these other things. I think it is easy to so our goal here is to develop skill and finesse. However, we cannot control the idea that somebody might look at what we're doing and say, hey, I do want to do it for macho reasons. And over the course of history, I think we have evidence of this kind of practice being, in my mind, misappropriated for that kind of purpose. So again, just calling out that that is absolutely, to us, not the goal, and it shouldn't be.
I would say too, if you're doing it for machismo, you're going to miss a lot of the benefits,
right?
Because that deliberate intention behind your actions is out of a desire to preserve your opponent, to set a safe pace for your opponent and for yourself. But if you're willing to tank the hit and you're willing to injure your partner, you're going to lose that benefit.
Right. I think there are a lot of different metaphors out there you could come up with, but here's maybe one like capoeira, right? When capoeira people practice, it's a dance, right? And I think there's this sort of misperception that it's a if we start doing it this way, it becomes this very cooperative thing. It really does not need to be cooperative, but it's still, just because something is controlled doesn't mean that I'm not trying to win, right? And so if you go back to the capoeira thing, yes, they're trying to not kill each other, but they are trying to sort of outdance each other, right? Mm-hmm. At the highest levels, the idea is I'm trying to win in this dance fight, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance, kind of thinking about this stuff, the balance between not going overboard in terms of like being too intense and potentially injuring your opponent, but at the same time still trying to be very earnest about developing skills so that like you clearly win an exchange and do it in a safe kind of way. So there's a lot more I think that could be said, but I think it's worth spending time on that very specific optics issue to just really emphasize like this is, if you're going to do this, please do it in a way that's actually for skills development, because that's one of the big benefits of all of that. So
yeah, and as soon as you bring it to any sort of if there's any competitive air at all in it, you might want to up the gear a bit. When we did an in-house tournament, we added knee and elbow protection, which we weren't using in practice, and we didn't really have any incident that I can recall that was nothing worth remembering, if there was anything. But the elbows and the knees don't slow you down, and if your opponent is being competitive with you at all, you're going to want that little bit of extra.
So I think a lot of the time people are very binary about stuff, like it's either no gear or full gear.
Yeah, in which case we should be doing harness.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a really good balance point here is really you want maximum mobility, but anything you can put on that doesn't sacrifice that mobility is okay, right? So where we landed was putting on mask and light gloves that doesn't impact your mobility, and then elbows, right? So that combination is pretty good.
I'm still a fan of the heavy gloves, but it might be a lack of control on my part.
Maybe.
Need to work on it.
Right.
It's all skills. You got to work on it.
So for that particular case, I would say, do it with the heavy gloves, but then also try the light ones and see how much of a difference there is. And if there is, then you can kind of mine that further. There's also the point about like throat protection, for instance. And
I've been lax about that in the past, but my recommendation is always going to be put the gorget on.
So here's the other thing. If you look at historical convention, we were just talking about fascial being like head only. I don't know that fascial has to be head only. I think it's using terminology can be really tricky when we're talking about the historical stuff, because this stuff is not super well documented, right? We have a lot of anecdotal stuff, but nothing that says, hey, these were all of the different expectations for fascial back in the day. Like, we're having to kind of reconstruct that and make guesses. So all we know are examples. So there are examples. Actually, one of the things that's very clearly written about in Joachim Meyer is, at that time, good Germans did not thrust, right? In fact, it's illegal, right? So that convention back then, who knows why, but it certainly had an effect in terms of presumably the safety of things. And so, for instance, throat gear, again, probably does not impact mobility too much. You might as well wear it. But you might also consider just throwing techniques that are focused more on sort of like the cutting dynamics as opposed to the thrusting dynamics.
Yeah, probably the most dangerous thing you can do in a longsword bout is a thrust to your opponent's throat. So you need protection there. If thrusting is less of a part of a system, slices still could be uncomfortable, if not actually injurious. Yeah.
So all of that is to say, there's sort of training that people tend to do for modern competitive HEMA, and there is more historical stuff that we could be doing. And the question is, how much value is there in doing the historical stuff? Based on what we've just said here, just developing good skill that is historical skill, this is a great way to do it. Having said that, there is obviously a bit of a gap between the kind of behavior that you're getting with that Blossfecht and fascial kind of lower intensity, lower gear fencing versus modern competitive HEMA. So does that gap need to be there? Is there something that can be done to bridge that? And one thing that I think goes hand in hand with this is, if you're using Blossfechten or fascial type fencing for training, gosh, wouldn't it be great if there was a competitive rule set that actually better suits that kind of skills development and training? And so this is something that we will be talking about, in the not too distant future, but just having something where we don't simply obey the convention of single touch and then stopping very quickly after, doing something that is much more continuous, having longer phrases where after you land a blow, you still need to fence and stay defensive, maybe land another blow, but at the very least try to make sure that you can be defensive or get out. That results in a much more potentially complex rule set. And having said that, though, if you can figure that out, and that will take, development cycles. It took us 10 plus years to figure out, single touch longsword. But if that can be figured out, the kind of benefits are just being able to take all of this extra, much more finesse sword skill and actually being able to use it in a, fun, competitive, interesting environment. So again, we'll talk about this in other videos, but like we've already been doing testing for over a year on stuff like this. Any things that you want to observe or call out?
Not in particular. I think we're coming along very well with our continuous blows, with our counted blows, excuse me, our continuous fencing rule set. In the interim, if you don't have such a rule set to play with, what we started with when I first came here was mainly just remembering to cover and flourish, even if it's just for, just to do it the right way. Yeah, just to practice good etiquette, really.
Yeah.
It looks funny to land a blow and then just stand there, fully extended.
I think so. That is one of my huge pet peeves. So like, don't get me started. That's easily another video right there. Yeah. So
it looks funny, and it doesn't have martial validity to just stand there after you've struck
probably
your opponent
not.
like
but
that.
Here's the thing: almost everybody does it.
Yeah.
And for good reason. Like you're in a competition. You're like, well, did I win? Right. Also, even in like a sparring situation, it's like, oh, I did my thing, and like I win, and it's easy to just be like, stop and just reset and walk away.
Yeah.
And you find like if you sort of enforce people like to continue fencing and get out and flourish and whatever, it's harder to do that. It is so not that I want to say it's lazy to just stop, but it's definitely easier to just stop.
Yeah, one thing that does pop into my head though is if you are in a counted blows tournament, stopping has some merits, because if I tag Jeff with one of these and then glance through and flourish and step away, judge might not even notice that. But if I land it and plant it and show it, then the judges see it. So in some situations, particularly a competitive environment, you got to work with what you're given, right? You got to work with the rule set that you're playing within. But it's still a good practice.
Yeah, and to your point, like this is one of the reasons that coming up with the rules like that is tricky, because actually seeing some of that action is more complicated.
Right.
So just because of the more continuous nature of it. So I think that's it for today. We will definitely be doing more in terms of talking about this kind of fencing and what the results are when we actually try to put that into a more competitive environment. But we'll talk about that soon enough. See you next time.